It was a Thursday night at the Ambrose, one of those quiet, expensive rooms in Chicago where nobody looks too long at anybody else. Luciano Calvano sat at the corner table he'd taken every Thursday for 6 years. 38, unhurried, a man who'd never once needed to raise his voice. 2 tables away sat a woman who didn't belong in a room like that, 27 maybe, still in her waitress uniform, faded blue, an apron with a coffee stain she hadn't had time to wash out, sitting alone, a paper envelope in front of her, and a plate she hadn't touched. A poor waitress who walked into the wrong restaurant, Luciano thought, and he went back to his wine, but something kept pulling his eyes across that floor. Her back was too straight. It was the posture of someone working very hard not to shake. Then a man came back to her table. He put a hand on her shoulder, pressed down, and leaned in close to say something by her ear. From a distance, it almost looked tender. And her other hand, lying flat on the tablecloth, opened. She turned her palm outward. She folded her thumb into it. Then she closed her 4 fingers down over that thumb and held them there. 3 seconds. Then her hand went slack, and she stared at that envelope like nothing had happened at all. Luciano set his glass down very slowly, because he knew exactly what that signal meant, and he knew she hadn't made it by accident. In 30 years in that world, first as his father's son, then as the man who'd taken his father's place, nobody had ever asked Luciano Calvano for help. They begged him for mercy. They begged him for time. They begged him to look the other way. Nobody asked him to save them. Tonight, a woman in a stained apron just had, and she hadn't said one single word to do it. What he chose to do in the next 60 seconds would change both of their lives forever. If you believe one quiet act of courage can shake an entire empire, hit that like button, and stay with Luciano to the very end. Subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. And share this with someone who needs to hear it. Now let's get back to that corner table at the Ambrose. Luciano set his wineglass down on the table and didn't look toward the other side of the dining room again. He lifted 2 fingers slightly from the tablecloth, a gesture so small that someone sitting a little more than 3 feet away wouldn't have noticed it. Emmett Shaw was standing at the far end of the dining room. He reached him within 10 seconds. Mr. Calvano, sit down for a moment, Emmett. The manager had been standing in this dining room longer than many of the people inside it had been alive in Chicago. He didn't ask why. He pulled out a chair and sat down, both hands resting on his knees like a man waiting to take an order for a banquet. I need 3 things, Luciano said. His voice was low and even, no faster and no slower than when he'd ordered his meal. First, from now until I tell you otherwise, no one on your staff goes near table 9. No water, no clearing plates, no checking in. If they call, let the bell ring. Emmett nodded once. Second, go back to the host stand, take out the reservation book, and write down the times. The time they arrived. The time I called you over. Write it by hand. Don't type it into the system. Use an ink pen. Yes, sir. Third, Luciano paused for exactly 1 beat. The restaurant's camera footage from tonight, from 7 o'clock until closing. It doesn't get deleted. It doesn't get overwritten. It doesn't get handed to anyone. Emmett lifted his head slightly. Even if someone comes asking for it. Even if someone walks in here carrying my business card. Even if that person says my name. Even if they tell you I sent them. Luciano looked at him. If anyone asks, give them whatever they want from the system. But you keep a copy. You keep it somewhere only you know about. And don't tell me where it is. The manager was silent for a few seconds. Then his eyes moved toward the other side of the dining room, and stayed there longer than courtesy allowed before returning to Luciano. I understand, Mr. Calvano. Thank you. Emmett stood and walked back toward the host stand with the unhurried gait of a man who had just made up his mind about something. Luciano took the pen from the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled the menu cover closer, turned it over, and wrote 2 lines in block letters, clean and plain, without flourish. Are you free to leave this place? If not, don't touch your water glass again. He folded the card once. The server he chose was the youngest man in the room, maybe 21 or 22. A kid who had spent the entire evening working only the outer section. Not once had he stepped into the inner dining area. Not once had he exchanged a glance with the man sitting at table 9. That was everything Luciano could learn about a person in 20 seconds. Take the water pitcher to table 9, he said. Pour for both of them. Set this down beside the woman's hand. Don't hand it directly to her. Then walk straight away and don't look back. The young man looked at the folded card, then at Luciano. You don't need to know what it says, Luciano said. And you don't need to know who I am. Just do exactly what I told you. Then go back to your section. The server took the pitcher and walked away. Luciano followed him with his eyes without turning his head. The young man poured water for the man first, then moved around to the other side and poured for the woman, and as he set the pitcher down, he let the folded card slip from his palm onto the tablecloth, exactly a handspan from her elbow. Then he walked straight away. The woman didn't pick it up. She only lowered her eyes, as though she were looking again at the papers inside the envelope. 3 seconds. Then she sat upright again. Her expression didn't change. Not a single muscle in her face moved. With 2 fingers, she slowly pushed the card beneath the edge of her plate, as if brushing aside a crumb of bread. And she didn't touch her water glass again. Not once. Over the next 10 minutes, the man across from her drained his glass and ordered another. She sat perfectly still. The water in front of her remained untouched, condensation gathering into droplets and running down the stem, darkening the tablecloth in a wet circle beneath the glass. She left it there. Luciano began reading the room. He didn't need to look directly. 30 years of living in that world had taught him how to read a table from the corner of his eye, the way other people read a gas price sign while driving past. At the next table, positioned at just the right distance from table 9, a man sat alone. He hadn't ordered food, only coffee. In front of him stood a leather briefcase upright, its clasps facing outward. He opened it once to take out a napkin. And in those 2 seconds, Luciano saw what was lying on top. A metal notary seal, the handheld kind, beside a stack of papers that had already been numbered. The man hadn't come to dinner. He had come to stamp documents. Then Luciano looked at the left breast pocket of the man at table 9. There were 2 phones inside. One sat deep in the pocket, with only a corner showing. The other stuck out higher, and the back of it was covered by a worn pink plastic case, rubbed pale at all 4 corners. The woman wasn't holding her own phone. And on the table, right beside the envelope, the man had removed his wristwatch and laid it face up on the tablecloth. The dial turned toward her, not toward himself. He wanted her to see the time. Luciano glanced at his own wrist. 8:41. He looked again at the watch lying face up, then at the stack of papers inside the envelope, then at the man with the notary seal, who had just finished his second cup of coffee and begun slowly rotating his wrist like someone counting down the minutes. 9 o'clock. Not earlier. Not later. 9 o'clock was the deadline for something no one else in this room even knew was happening. 19 minutes remained. Luciano folded his napkin and placed it to the left of his plate. Luciano stood up. He didn't hurry. He fastened one button of his suit jacket and crossed the open floor between the 2 rows of tables with the easy pace of a man looking for the restroom. Then stopped at table 9 and pulled out the empty chair. He sat down. The man was halfway through a sentence. He turned, his face already arranging itself into the expression of someone about to tell a stranger he'd taken the wrong seat. And then he saw Luciano clearly. The sentence died in the middle. Brett Corrigan was 34 years old, and within the organization, there were 3 layers of men between him and the level where Luciano Calvano stood. He had never sat at the same table with him. He had seen Luciano exactly 4 times in his life, every one of those times from the far end of a room, and every one of those times while Luciano was speaking to someone else. The blood drained from his face in precisely the way it leaves a man who has just understood where he is standing. Mr. Calvano. His voice was half a register higher than it had been 30 seconds earlier. I didn't know you were sitting here. You've been sitting 2 tables away from me for an hour and a half, Luciano said. His tone wasn't harsh. He spoke as though reminding Brett of some small fact they both already knew. I sit at that table every Thursday night. Brett couldn't answer. His hand was still resting on the woman's shoulder. It withdrew slowly, like an animal retreating into its den. Nice place, Luciano said. You pick it? She did. She picked it. Luciano nodded and let the words remain on the table for another beat. Whose money are you using to take your guest to dinner? I'm paying. Then tonight, I'm paying for you. He wasn't looking at Brett when he said it. He was looking at the envelope. The man at the next table had risen. He didn't look toward them, didn't nod to anyone, simply closed his leather briefcase, turned the locks, tucked 2 bills beneath the coffee saucer, and walked toward the door with the speed of a man who had planned his exit before he ever sat down. The glass door closed behind him. No one in the dining room looked up. Luciano never took his eyes off the envelope. She's leaving with me, he said. Brett opened his mouth. There was a very brief moment, less than a second, when he intended to say no. Luciano saw that moment. He also saw it disappear, because to say no, Brett would have to explain why. He would have to say that he was in the middle of something. Then he would have to say what that something was. Then he would have to say who had ordered it. And by the time he reached the 3rd word, he would be admitting in front of the boss that something was being run in this city without the boss knowing about it. In their world, admitting that was far more dangerous than losing a dinner table. Yes, Mr. Calvano, Brett said. Thank you, Luciano said. and held out his hand. Not to shake. His palm faced upward, his fingers loosely curled, resting in the middle of the table directly over the envelope. Brett looked at it. Then he slid the envelope across the tablecloth into Luciano's hand. "The phone, too," Luciano said. Brett paused for half a second. Then he reached into the left breast pocket of his jacket, pulled out the phone with the pink plastic case worn pale at all four corners, and placed it on the table. Luciano pushed it toward the woman with 2 fingers. She picked it up. She said nothing. She hadn't spoken once since he sat down, and he hadn't asked her a single question. Luciano opened the envelope and pulled out the stack of papers right there at the table, in front of Brett, beneath the hanging lights of the dining room. He didn't ask permission. He turned to the first page. An Illinois business registration form, the company name printed in bold at the top, the ownership section left blank, waiting to be filled in. He turned to the second page. Another form, identical, with a different company name. He kept going. The third was the same. 4 pages in all, 4 names, and on the line for sole owner of all 4 companies, there was an empty space waiting for a signature. He turned to the final document. This wasn't a registration form. It was a power of attorney, 2 pages long, dense with small print. His eyes moved quickly down to the last provision. Then he stopped. In the lower right corner, above the line reserved for the person granting authority, there was a round seal already stamped onto the page. Beside the seal was a signature. Luciano stared at it for a long time, long enough for Brett to begin shifting his weight from one foot to the other, long enough for another drop of condensation to slide down the stem of the untouched water glass and fall onto the tablecloth. He knew that seal. He knew that signature too. The handwriting slanted to the right, the first letter rising high before dropping into a line that was almost perfectly straight. The final period pressed down so hard it nearly pierced the paper. He had signed it roughly 2,000 times over the past 7 years. He ran his thumb slowly across the page once. Then he folded the papers together, slipped them into the inside pocket of his jacket, and rose from the table, because the signature on that page was his own, and Luciano Calvano had never put pen to that document. The car was already waiting at the curb when they stepped out of the restaurant. Ray Kowalski opened the rear door without looking at the woman walking beside the boss, without asking a single question, then closed it behind them and got into the driver's seat. "Circle the block once first," Luciano said. The car pulled away. The woman sat close to the door on the right, her back not touching the seat. Her hands rested in her lap, one over the other, her fingers clenched so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. She stared straight through the windshield. She didn't look at him. She didn't look out the side window either. Luciano said nothing for the first 2 blocks. He didn't ask if she was all right. He didn't tell her she was safe. He knew both were the kinds of things people said to make themselves feel better, not the person sitting beside them. The car stopped at a red light. The clock on the dashboard read 9:04. She looked at the numbers. Her shoulders dropped perhaps half an inch, then rose again. "What's your name?" Luciano asked. She didn't answer immediately. The light turned green. The car traveled another half block. "Grace Bennett." He nodded once. "I'm Luciano Calvano. I know who you are," she said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. It was flat in the way the surface of a lake turns flat just before the wind begins to change. "I knew who you were before you ever sat down at that table." Luciano turned his head toward her. It was the first time since they had gotten into the car that he looked directly at her face. "Is that right?" "Yes." She kept looking straight ahead. "You won't remember my last name. There's no reason you would. You probably never even read it once." She paused. "But you signed a piece of paper that had it on it." Ray glanced up at the rearview mirror. Only once, very quickly, before his eyes returned to the road. No one in the car said anything more. Luciano didn't ask her to repeat herself. He didn't ask which paper, or what year, or where she had gotten such an idea. He simply sat still, and only after a long while did he speak again without turning his head. "Ray, take us to Bridgeport." The driver didn't ask why. He changed lanes at the next intersection. For the rest of the drive, no one spoke. Grace didn't thank him. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't ask what he intended to do with the papers inside his jacket pocket. She remained exactly as she was, back away from the seat, hands locked together, until the car turned off the main road and stopped in front of a row of low buildings in Bridgeport. The place they entered was the office of a small construction company. 2 rooms on the ground floor, with a faded plastic sign that read, Calvano Brothers Construction. Inside there was nothing but a desk, metal chairs, a tall filing cabinet with many drawers, and the smell of old paper. Luciano switched on the light. Ray remained by the door. "Wait outside," Luciano said. The door closed. Luciano took off his suit jacket and draped it over the back of a chair, then walked to the small table in the corner, poured a glass of water, and set it down in front of her. She looked at the water. She didn't touch it. "You can leave it there," he said. "I don't mean anything by it. It's just that you haven't had anything to drink for 2 hours." He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Not behind the desk, but beside it, on the same side as she was, leaving enough space between them. Then he took the stack of papers from his inside pocket, placed it on the table between them, and didn't touch it again. "Miss Bennett." "Yes. I can tear these papers up right now," he said. "You go home, and tomorrow morning no one will come looking for you. I can make that happen. If that's what you want, I'll do it now." She didn't answer. "But if I do that," he continued, "I'll never know why my signature is on the last page, and you'll never know why they chose you." Grace turned her head. It was the first time all evening that she looked directly into his face. Her eyes were red, but dry. "What do you want me to say?" "Start at the beginning," Luciano said, "before you even knew my name." He leaned back in the chair and didn't say another word. She remained silent for a long time, long enough for the sound of a truck passing outside to rise through the room and fade away completely. Then she pulled the glass of water closer. She didn't drink. She only wrapped both hands around it, as though she were holding something that might fall if she let go. "My father's name was Thomas Bennett," she said. "He owned a diner on Throop Street. He died 5 years ago. The diner had been open since her father was 36, she said, and she had been born 2 years after it started running, so she couldn't remember a single day of her life when their home hadn't smelled of onions frying at 5 o'clock in the morning. It wasn't a large place. 14 seats, 1 long counter, 1 neon sign whose bulbs her father replaced himself every winter. The regulars were workers from the printing shop across the street, and a handful of old men who had sat in the same seats for 20 years. He was never rich, but he paid everything on time, and he kept every receipt, she said. Then she stopped, took a sip of water, and continued in that same even voice, as though she were reading back a form she had filled out too many times. One afternoon in October 5 years earlier, someone came into the diner and told her father that he still owed $40,000. It wasn't a bank debt. It was a loan from more than a decade earlier, money he had borrowed to repair the kitchen and reinstall the exhaust system after a health inspection, money he had borrowed from people in the neighborhood because no bank would lend to a 14-seat diner. Her father said he had paid it off years ago. They told him the book said otherwise. He asked for a week to find the paperwork. They gave him 3 days. The third night was a Friday. The diner closed at 10 o'clock. She was in her final year of college then, living in a dorm across the city, and she learned what had happened through a phone call just before midnight. 3 men came to the diner after closing, she said. They stayed inside for about 20 minutes. They didn't smash anything. The woman who owned the laundromat next door later told her she hadn't heard a sound. That was the thing Grace had thought about for 5 years, that there hadn't been a sound. Then the men left. Her father went out into the alley behind the diner to lock the storage door, the way he did every night. That was where they found him. The ambulance arrived 17 minutes later. The hospital listed the cause as a heart attack. He was 60 years old and had a history of heart trouble, she said. So on paper, no one had done anything to him. She set the glass of water down. Luciano said nothing. He didn't move. She continued. She thought that when her father died, the whole thing would end with him. She was 22 years old, and she truly believed that. But 9 days after the funeral, someone came to her house. The man was very polite. He said he was sorry for what had happened. Then he placed a piece of paper on the kitchen table saying that the $40,000 debt belonged to the family, and now it belonged to her. "I asked what would happen if I didn't pay," she said. "He didn't threaten me. He only said that what happened to your father was unfortunate, and they hoped they wouldn't have to discuss another unfortunate thing again. Then he thanked me for my time, and he left. The first year, she tried to keep the diner. She dropped out before her final semester, came home to work the kitchen, hired 1 helper, and opened 6 days a week. After 11 months, she understood that she was paying the interest with the money she earned selling food, while the principal never moved at all. She sold the diner the following September. Every dollar from the sale went toward that debt. Even the neon sign whose bulbs her father had replaced himself every winter went with it, because the buyer included it in the price. Then came 4 years. $600 a week, she said, hand-delivered, in cash, every Tuesday morning. She worked the morning shift at a diner on Halsted Street and the evening shift at another restaurant. And on the weeks when she came up short, she took extra weekend shifts, 260 weeks. She said the number as casually as someone giving a street address. The only thing she managed to keep was the 2-story house her father had left her, and she kept it because it was the one thing she refused to sell, and she had told them so as early as the 2nd year. 3 months ago, The way she paid changed. The man who came to collect stopped taking cash. He told her there was another way to erase the debt. All she had to do was sign some papers. She asked what kind of papers. He said she wasn't selling the house. She wasn't borrowing more money. She only had to sign 4 companies, she said. And with the tip of one finger, she nudged the stack of papers on the table slightly toward Luciano. 4 limited liability companies in my name. I don't put a single dollar into them. I don't do anything for them. I'm just the name on the registration. Money will move through them. I asked how much money. He laughed and told me I didn't need to know. She lifted her eyes to him. I didn't finish college, she said. But my father was an accountant before he opened the diner. I know what happens when the name on the registration isn't the person holding the money. If everything runs smoothly, my debt disappears. If something goes wrong, they'll pull out the paperwork, and the only name on it will be mine. They won't find anyone else's name anywhere. Then she straightened in her chair and spoke the final sentence in that same steady voice. Tonight was my deadline to sign. 9 o'clock. After 9, they said they wouldn't ask me again. They would ask the house. Luciano remained still for a long while after she finished speaking. Then he asked only one question. Do you still have the receipts? Grace looked at him. It wasn't the look of someone caught off guard by a difficult question. It was the look of someone who had just heard the exact question she had been waiting 5 years for someone to ask. She lifted the cloth bag from her lap, opened it, and took out a dark blue hardcover notebook, the kind sold in corner stores. Its 4 corners bent, and part of the spine split open and repaired with clear tape. She placed it in the middle of the table and pushed it toward him. Go ahead and open it, she said. Luciano lifted the cover. The first page had been ruled by hand, divided into 4 columns: date, amount, recipient, signature. The handwriting was small and even slightly slanted, written in blue ballpoint ink, and, in a few places, black when the blue pen had run dry halfway through. The first entry was dated Tuesday of the 3rd week of November, 5 years earlier. $600. Beside it was an abbreviated signature. 2 letters written over each other in a hurried scrawl by someone who hadn't wanted to leave much behind. He turned the page. Then another. Then another. 13 entries on every page. 1 entry for every week. Some weeks the amount wasn't 600 but 300, with a smaller note beside it saying the balance would be made up the following week. 1 line from February of the 2nd year contained only 2 words, none paid. And beneath it, the following week's entry showed $1,200. There was a stretch of 3 consecutive weeks, with no signature in the final column, and in the margin she had written in pencil that the collector had refused to sign that day, along with the time and location. He turned to the last page, containing any writing. The final entry was dated Tuesday of the previous week. He closed the notebook, rested his hand on the cover, and didn't give it back immediately. How many entries? He asked. 260, she said. I counted them again last month. He nodded slowly. You recorded everything from the first week. From the first week, she said. My father worked as an accountant for 19 years before he opened the diner. He taught me how to keep books when I was 16, sitting at the counter in the diner every Saturday night after closing. He used to say one thing over and over until I got sick of hearing it. If someone takes something from you, write it down. She drew the notebook back toward herself with 2 fingers, but he hadn't yet lifted his hand from the cover. Do you want to keep it? She asked. I want to make copies, he said. Right here, tonight, and then I'll give it back for you to take home. If I keep the original, then it's in my hands, and you have no reason to trust anyone who is holding anything in this world. She looked at him for several seconds, then she let go. He stood, switched on the old printer in the corner, and personally placed every page on the scanner glass one at a time. 22 pages. He didn't ask anyone else to do it. When he was finished, he stacked the copies neatly, clipped them together, and returned the original notebook to her. She put it back into the cloth bag and zipped it closed. Then he opened the door and called Ray inside. Take Miss Bennett home, he said. Walk her all the way to the door, wait until she's inside and the lights come on, then leave. Tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, go back there, park on the street, and stay in the car until she comes out of the house. Ray nodded. Grace stood. She remained there for a moment, one hand holding the strap of her bag, looking as though she meant to say something. She didn't. She walked toward the door. Only when Cheney thanked the threshold did she stop and turn around. What are you going to do with those papers? She asked. I don't know yet, he said. I'm not promising you anything tonight. She looked at him for another second, then nodded and left. She didn't thank him. He wasn't waiting for thanks. The door closed. Outside, the car engine started, faded into the distance, and disappeared. Luciano stood alone in the room, and for a while he did nothing at all. Then he switched off the ceiling light, leaving only the desk lamp on, walked into the back room, and opened the filing cabinet against the wall. This wasn't where the company's paperwork was kept. The construction company had its own accountant and its own office somewhere else. This cabinet was something his father had left behind, and inside it was what his father used to call memory, because he didn't trust anyone's memory, including his own. Every decision made over 30 years was in there, recorded by code rather than by name. Luciano pulled open the third drawer, found the cloth-bound index book, and turned to October of 5 years earlier. His finger stopped on the 9th line. A 4-character code, 1 letter, 1 stroke, and 1 number. No person's name, no address, only the code, and beside it the number of a storage box. He read that number, closed the index book, and stood staring for a long time at the row of boxes stacked on top of the cabinet, before finally reaching up and taking down the one bearing that number. The box was heavier than he expected. He set it on the desk beneath the lamp, cut through the tape around the lid with a utility knife, and opened it. On top was a single sheet of paper, 1 page, typed, single-spaced, 9 lines in all. He recognized it immediately because he had seen hundreds exactly like it over the past 7 years, always brought to him late in the afternoon, always accompanied by a brief explanation, always resting on top of another stack of papers. It listed the name of a diner, an address on Throop Street, the figure $40,000, and the final 3 lines stated that the debtor had been contacted 3 times, had failed to respond, and recommended proceeding in the usual manner. In the lower right corner were 2 initials written in black ink, his own initials. He remembered that afternoon, not because there had been anything special about it. He remembered it because there had been nothing special about it at all. Victor Sarno had carried in a stack of 9 sheets, placed them on the desk, and stood beside him, while Luciano signed each one, and between the 4th sheet and the 5th, the 2 of them had even talked about something completely unrelated. He signed all 9 in roughly 4 minutes. He hadn't turned a single one over. Luciano set that page aside and looked down at the rest of the box. Beneath it was a thick file held together with a metal clip, every page numbered in the upper corner. 34 pages. It had never been opened, because the paper along the outer edges was still flat and lighter in color than the cover around it. He pulled out a chair, sat down, and began reading from page 1. Page 4 was a copy of the original loan agreement, signed 16 years earlier between Thomas Bennett and a small lending company Luciano knew belonged to the organization. Page 7 was the repayment schedule, 24 installments. Pages 9 through 19 were receipts, 1 to a page, stamped and numbered consecutively. Page 20 was the final receipt, dated in April 11 years earlier, with a typed line stating clearly that the loan had been paid in full and closed, accompanied by the signature of a cashier who was now dead and the round seal of the lending company. Page 21 was an internal reconciliation prepared that same month, confirming that no balance remained. He kept reading through page 34. There wasn't a single line showing that the debt had ever been reopened. There wasn't a single line explaining why. 11 years later, it had appeared again on a 9-line summary sheet. Luciano sat for a long time with the file open across his lap. Then he made a calculation he didn't want to make. October, 5 years earlier. He went backward in his mind, searching for the point in time, and found it. That fall, his mother had asked him to come to the center she had founded in the neighborhood and sit through a training session with her staff. And he had sat in the last row for exactly 90 minutes, mildly annoyed, mildly amused, learning how to recognize a woman who was asking for help without being able to say the words aloud. The same fall, the same city, the same man. He reached for his phone and called Ray. "Is she inside the house yet?" "Yes, sir," Ray said. "The downstairs lights just came on." "Go back," Luciano said. "Knock on the door. Ask if she's willing to return to the office one more time. If she says no, leave. Come back here. Don't say another word to her." 25 minutes later, the door opened. Grace stood on the threshold, still holding the cloth bag, and she didn't step inside immediately. He rose from his chair. "Come in," he said. She entered and sat in the same chair she had occupied before. He didn't pour her any water this time. He lifted the 34-page file and placed it on the table in front of her, then laid the 9-line sheet on top, face up with the initials visible. Then he sat down across from her. "This is your father's file," he said. "It's been sitting in this cabinet for 5 years. She looked at the top page. She read it from beginning to end. Then her eyes stopped at the lower right corner. He didn't wait for her to ask. "This sheet is the summary," he said. "It was brought to me one afternoon in October 5 years ago with 8 others. Those 2 letters in the corner are mine. They mean I agreed. They mean I authorized it." She said nothing. He placed his hand on the thick file underneath and pushed it slightly toward her. "And this is the original file," he said. 34 pages. It was sitting directly beneath that sheet in the same box all these years. On page 20 is the receipt showing the account was paid in full, signed 11 years ago. Your father finished paying it 11 years ago. That $40,000 debt never existed." He stopped, and then he said the last thing without anyone forcing him to say it. "I'm the one who signed the order that sent them to your father's diner. I didn't read it. I trusted the man who brought me the paper." Grace didn't cry. She didn't say a word. She stared at the 9-line sheet for a long time, then reached out, but not to take it. She took the cloth bag from her lap, opened the zipper, and checked that the blue notebook was still inside. Then she stood and walked toward the door. He didn't stop her, because for the first time in his life, Luciano Calvano couldn't think of a single reason worthy enough to make her stay. At 7 o'clock the next morning, Lou Petrosino arrived at the Bridgeport office, and he arrived 20 minutes early, something he had never done for anyone in all 49 years of his life. Luciano had already been sitting there since the night before. He hadn't gone home. "Sit down, Lou." The chief accountant sat, set his briefcase on his lap, lowered it to the floor, then picked it up again. "I need 4 things," Luciano said. "The ledgers for the last 6 years. The complete versions, not the quarterly summaries. A list of every subcontractor that received money from city infrastructure contracts. The originals of every disbursement authorization bearing my initials, not copies. And a list of the recurring collections in the neighborhood." Lou said nothing for 4 seconds. "Which recurring collections, sir?" he asked. "Bring me everything you have," Luciano said. "I'll read it myself." At noon that day, Lou returned with a cardboard box. Inside were the ledgers for the 2 most recent years, a subcontractor list printed from a computer, and 9 original disbursement authorizations. Luciano counted them in front of him. 6 years, he said. "I asked for 6 years. The other 4 years are stored off-site in Cicero," Lou said. "I need time to retrieve them. And the disbursement orders. A lot of them only exist as copies now, sir." Victor kept the originals. Lou's right hand was resting on the edge of the desk, and it was trembling, not badly, just enough that his fingertips couldn't stay still. Luciano watched that hand longer than he watched the man's face. "Go home," he said. "Bring me the other 4 years tomorrow afternoon." Lou stood and walked toward the door, then stopped. "Mr. Calvano," he said, "if you have anything you want to ask me, I hope you'll ask me here, not somewhere else." Then he left. Luciano stayed with that box for the rest of the day and through the night. He wasn't an accountant, but his father had forced him to learn how to read ledgers for 2 summers in a row when he was 17. And his father had told him something he only now truly understood, that people don't steal by erasing a number. They steal by adding a name. He began with the subcontractor list. There were 41 names. He knew 34 of them. They were crews that had worked with the family's construction company since his father's time. People he saw at weddings and funerals around the neighborhood. The remaining 7 names he had never heard before. He copied those 7 names onto a separate sheet of paper, then traced each one. The first was Meridian Site Services. It appeared in the books 29 times over 6 years, each time attached to a large payment listed as subcontracting fees for grading and site preparation on municipal drainage, road, and bridge contracts. He called someone in the Public Works Department whom he had known for years and asked for one simple thing: how many workers that company had ever sent to which job sites. The answer came 3 hours later. None. There wasn't a single site access record under that company's name anywhere in the 6-year period. Luciano checked the other 6 names, and all 6 were exactly the same. No employees, no yard, no vehicles. The registered addresses for all 7 companies were suite numbers in buildings that rented mailboxes. And all 7 companies had been formed within an 18-month period, a few weeks apart from one another. And on the registration documents for all 7, the registered agent line carried the same name from the same small service office in the northern suburbs. He added up the payments. He added them 3 times, because the first time he didn't believe the number. $74 million over 6 years. He set down his pen and sat very still. 74 million was a large number, but it was money, and money could be recovered or it couldn't, and either way it was still only money. That wasn't what made him sit there motionless. What made him sit still was at the bottom of the box, inside a thin, unlabeled folder he had almost overlooked. Inside were weekly collection sheets, arranged by street route, 1 business per line: laundromat, bakery, shoe repair shop, 14-seat diner, flower shop, electrical supply store, corner grocery, He turned through the entire stack, counted with the tip of his pen, and wrote the final number in the margin. 340. 340 small neighborhood businesses paying every week for 6 years. The day he took his father's place 7 years earlier, he had summoned every branch leader into one room and told them exactly one thing: that from that day forward, no one was to take from the neighborhood anymore, and anyone who did was no longer one of his men. He had believed that order was being followed. He had believed it for 7 years because no one had ever come to tell him otherwise, and because he had never once opened this file himself and counted. He closed the thin folder. Among the 340 businesses on that list, on the Throop Street route, there was one line that had been crossed out in red ink 5 years earlier, and beside the crossed-out entry were 2 handwritten words: "Closed down." Rosalie House stood 4 blocks from the office, inside a 2-story red brick building that had once been a fire station. Luciano went there close to noon the next day. He didn't call ahead. The receptionist at the front desk recognized him and started to rise, but he motioned for her to stay seated, then walked straight into the office at the end of the hall. Gia was bent over a stack of papers. She looked up, and for the first half-second her face tightened in the way a person's face tightens when her older brother suddenly appears in a place he has never visited in the middle of the day. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No," Luciano said. He pulled out a chair and sat down. "I want to ask you something." Gia set down her pen. At 33, she had been running this place for 3 years, ever since their mother died, and before that she had worked here for 7 years under her. In the family, she was the only person who had never asked him what he did for money, and also the only person he had never lied to. "That hand signal," he said. "The one Mom taught. How many people actually use it?" Gia looked at him for a moment. "Why are you asking?" "I'm just asking." She stood, walked to the filing cabinet in the corner, took out a folder, and brought it back to the desk. "Since I took over," she said, "there have been 19 cases where someone came here because another person saw that signal. 19 in 3 years. 9 were neighbors who saw it through a window. 4 were coworkers. 3 were store employees. 2 were bus drivers." She closed the folder. "But you're asking the wrong question." "What's wrong with it?" "You're asking how many people use it," Gia said. "The real number, the one nobody can count, is how many people used it, and nobody saw. People don't raise their hands in the middle of a public square. They do it for 3 seconds while someone else is looking away. And if no one happens to be looking in the right direction during those 3 seconds, the hand comes back down, and it's as if nothing ever happened." She sat down again. "That's why Mom made everyone in the neighborhood learn it. Not to teach the person in danger. To teach the people standing outside." Luciano said nothing. He remembered the room on the 2nd floor of this very building 5 years earlier. One October afternoon. More than 20 folding chairs, and his mother standing at the front beside a flip chart. She had called him 3 times over 2 weeks, and he had postponed twice. And the 3rd time she told him that if he didn't come, she would go to his office herself and sit there until he went with her. He had come. He had sat in the back row for 90 minutes, checked his watch 4 times, and thought the whole thing had nothing to do with him. Then she made everyone in the room practice the gesture 3 times. He had done it because she was watching him. "Do you remember when Mom made me come to one of those sessions?" he said. Gia gave a quiet laugh. "The whole family remembers. Mom bragged about it for a month. She said she'd managed to trick the most stubborn man in the neighborhood into sitting still for 90 minutes. Then the laughter faded, and she looked at him more closely. "Did you see someone make it?" she asked. He didn't answer. Gia didn't ask again. She was someone who knew when to stop. She only sat quietly for a moment, then continued in a different voice. "Did you ever ask why Mom chose that particular signal?" "It already existed," he said. "It did, but there were dozens of others that already existed too," Gia said. "Mom chose that one because it doesn't require words, and it leaves no trace. Once it's done, a hand goes back to being an ordinary hand. No one can prove you just did anything." She rolled the pen once across the surface of the desk. "Mom never told her own story during the training sessions," she said. "She told other people's stories. But once, when I'd just started working here, a woman came in and sat crying for 4 hours without being able to say a single word, and after she left, Mom sat in the exact chair you're sitting in now and said one thing to me, just once." Gia looked up. "Mom taught it to the whole neighborhood because she once didn't have it." Luciano didn't move. He didn't ask anything else. He knew she had married his father when she was 19, and he knew what the early years of their family had been like, because he had been born during those years, even though he had been too young to remember them clearly, and because there were nights when all he could remember was the sound of a door closing and nothing else. In 38 years, He had never heard anyone in the family say it aloud. He sat in silence for a long time. Then he stood. "I'm heading out," he said. "Luciano." "What?" "If you did see someone make that signal," Gia said. "What you need to do first isn't go looking for the person who forced them into it. That comes later. The first thing is to ask that person what they need, and do exactly what they tell you, not what you think they need. People make that signal because someone has taken away their right to decide for themselves. If you rescue them and then start deciding for them all over again, you're no different from the person who did it in the first place." He stood in the doorway for another second. Then he walked outside, and when he got into the car, he called Ray and told him to find out one thing: whose collection route the Ambrose belonged to. Ray called back 2 hours later. "The Ambrose isn't on anyone's collection route," he said. "River North doesn't have a collection route. It hasn't since your father's time. And Brett Corrigan works the south side, from 35th Street down. He has no business being up there at all." Luciano sat silently in the car. "There's one more thing," Ray said. "That corner table. Everyone in the family knows you sit there on Thursday nights. Everyone knows it. A kid like Brett bringing something that hasn't been cleared with you into that dining room on a Thursday night of all nights means either he's stupid or he didn't choose the place." "He's not stupid," Luciano said. "Then who chose it?" "Tell Corrigan to come see me," Luciano said. "Tell him not to tell anyone." Brett came that afternoon, and he started talking the moment he sat down, because he'd had 2 nights to think about what he was going to say. "I didn't choose that place, Mr. Calvano," he said. "She did. I was going to do it in my office. She said she wouldn't sign anything somewhere private. She said she was scared. Said it had to be somewhere crowded, somewhere bright, somewhere with staff walking around. I figured women get like that sometimes, so I let it go. She also said she wouldn't ride in my car. She came on her own." He wet his lips. "I swear I didn't know you were sitting there that night. I never looked into the intersection." Then he added one more thing that he thought was harmless. "And she got there 40 minutes before I did. By the time I arrived, she was already sitting at that table." Luciano sent him home. Then he called 2 men and told them to ask around. No threats, no money offered, just questions. The answers came back within a day and a half. 3 weeks before that night, Grace Bennett had traded shifts with a coworker at the diner on Halsted Street 3 separate times, and all 3 trades had fallen on Thursday evenings. All 3 nights, she had gone to River North. The first time, she sat in the cafe diagonally across from the Ambrose from 7 o'clock until nearly 10. The second time, she went inside and sat at the outer bar, ordered a glass of water and the cheapest appetizer on the menu, stayed for 45 minutes, then left. The third time, she did the same thing, and that night she spoke to a waitress while waiting for the check, and the waitress remembered because the question had been unusual. She asked why that corner table was always left empty. The waitress said, "I told her it was permanently reserved." She asked what kind of customer gets a permanent reservation. I told her I wasn't allowed to say. She laughed and dropped it. Didn't ask again. Ray placed the written notes on the desk and made no comment. Luciano read them twice. Then he folded the paper, picked up his coat, and told Ray to drive him to Throop Street. Grace opened the door a little before 9 o'clock that evening. She had just gotten home from work. She looked at him standing on her front steps, and she didn't seem surprised. That was the first thing he noticed. She opened the door wider and stepped back. He went inside, but he didn't sit down. "You went to the Ambrose 3 times in 3 weeks, he said. "You sat in the cafe across the street. You went inside and sat at the bar. You asked a waitress about the corner table. You arrived 40 minutes before Corrigan and chose the table yourself." Grace set her bag on a chair. She didn't sit. "Yes," she said. "You told Corrigan you were afraid of being somewhere private." "I was afraid," she said. "But that wasn't why I chose that place." He looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them moved. "Then tell me why," he said. 4 months ago, I went to the county courthouse and asked for a copy of the records on my father's death," she said. "They gave me 3 pages. There was nothing in them. I went to lawyers. 3 of them. All 3 told me the same thing, that there was no one I could sue, and that if I went to the police, I would have to explain the money I'd been paying for 4 years, and I had no proof of who had taken it except a few scribbled signatures in a notebook I kept myself. The 3rd lawyer told me I should leave the city." She drew in a breath. "Then 3 months ago, they changed the arrangement. They stopped taking money. They wanted my name, and I understood that this time, if I signed, I wasn't losing money. I was losing the rest of my life." She continued, her voice never rising. "I don't have anything, Mr. Calvano. I don't have money. I don't have a lawyer. I don't have anyone behind me. I had exactly one thing. I knew whose name was on the paper that killed my father. And that man was the only person in this city powerful enough to stop the people who were killing me. She straightened. So I went looking for you. It took me 3 weeks to figure out which table you sat at. I had to make Corrigan believe he'd chosen the place himself. And that night, I sat there for more than 2 hours without knowing whether you'd looked in my direction even once. You can call that using you. I won't argue, but I'm not going to apologize to you. On Monday morning, an elderly woman came to the Bridgeport office and waited 40 minutes in the hallway because she refused to give her name to anyone but Luciano. When he came out, she stood and held a hard-sided handbag with worn handles against her chest. Adele Marchetti, 71 years old. She had worked as a notary in this neighborhood for 30 years, and nearly everyone within 4 blocks had sat across from her desk at least once in their life to sign a home purchase, a power of attorney, or a will. You come inside, she told him. I can't say this in the hallway. Once they were in the office, she set the bag on her lap and opened it, taking out a thick black ledger whose pages had yellowed along the edges. 2 people came to my house last Friday, she said. They brought 11 documents. They wanted me to sign a statement confirming that those papers had really been notarized by me. They were very polite. They said I only needed to confirm them because the archived copies had been lost. She continued in the calm voice of someone who had lived long enough to be afraid of very few things anymore. I told them to let me see the papers. All 11 had my seal on them, my exact seal, my commission number, my signature, but I had never seen a single one of those documents in my life. She pushed the black ledger toward him. I've kept a record for 30 years. Every time I stamp something, it gets 1 line. Date, time, name of the person signing, identification number, and their signature right beside it. Nobody ever made me do that. When I started, state law didn't require anything like it. My father was a welder, and he taught me that whatever work a person does, they have to protect the integrity of that work. I've only been protecting mine. Luciano opened the ledger. The handwriting was perfectly even from the first page to the last, unchanged through 30 years. Did you check? He asked. I did, she said. She turned to a page marked with a slip of paper. There isn't a matching entry. Not one. And 4 of those documents are dated during the week I was in Italy. My sister died that year. I was gone 11 days. I still have my passport, kid. I even kept the ticket stubs. She closed the ledger and looked at him. Then she said the words that made him put down his pen. I didn't come here because of those 11 documents. I came because of the name on 2 of them. What name? Thomas Bennett, she said. Luciano sat still. You don't know that name, do you? She asked. I do now, he said. She nodded slowly. 20 years ago, Tommy Bennett was an accountant for your father's construction side, she said. He did it for 19 years. Your father trusted him. I knew him because he used to bring papers to me to notarize, several times a week, year after year. Then one day, he quit. Just walked away. No warning to anyone. A few months later, I saw that he'd opened a diner on Throop Street. And after that, he stopped coming to me. She tightened both hands together. Only once did I ask him why he'd left accounting to sell breakfast. He gave me 3 sentences, and that was all. He said he'd discovered that someone was setting up companies with no one actually working inside them, and money from city contracts was being routed through those companies. And when he raised the issue, he was told not to worry, because it had been approved. Then he told me he'd taken copies. Copies of what? Luciano asked. The books, she said. He told me he'd copied by hand everything he'd worked on during those 19 years. And he kept it at home. He said that as long as those papers stayed where they were, he would be left alone. Luciano rose from his chair. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her. The old woman said, The people who came to my house last Friday were Victor Sarno's men. I've known that boy since he was running barefoot on 31st Street. Luciano didn't turn around. He was rebuilding the entire picture from the beginning, one piece at a time. A debt paid off 11 years earlier suddenly came back to life. 3 days of grace. 3 men entered the diner after closing and stayed inside for 20 minutes without breaking a single thing. The laundromat owner next door heard no noise, not because they had been gentle, because they hadn't come to destroy anything. They had come to search. The $40,000 debt had never been about collecting money. It had been an excuse to get inside. And when Thomas Bennett died, and they still hadn't found what they were looking for, the debt wasn't erased. It was transferred into his daughter's name. The first year, she kept the diner. And they had an entire year to come and go through that place whenever they wanted. Nothing. She sold the diner. Still nothing. Then for 4 straight years, someone came knocking on her door every single week to collect money. And every knock gave them another few minutes standing inside that house. And 3 months ago, they stopped taking cash and started demanding her name on paperwork. Because a name on paper led to the house. And the house was the one thing she had never agreed to sell. Luciano turned around. Mrs. Marchetti, he said. Do you remember Bennett's house? Number 34, the dead end behind Throop Street, she said. 2 stories. Has an attic. I handled the transfer papers for him in 1998. Luciano reached for the phone. Luciano hadn't even had time to press the number when the phone vibrated in his hand. It wasn't Ray. It was Frank Mazzara. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, the old man said. The old warehouse on Ashland Street. Someone asked for a sit-down. Who asked? You already know who. In their world, a sit-down was the only way to settle disputes between men who couldn't take one another to court. And once one was called, no one was allowed to stay away, not even the person whose life and loyalty were about to be dissected in front of everyone. Frank Mazzara was 68 years old. He hadn't worked for anyone or taken anyone's side in 30 years, and that was why people allowed him to sit at the head of the table. The next morning, there were 7 men inside the warehouse. The heads of the 4 branches sat in a straight row. Frank was at the head of the table. Beside him sat a man from Kansas City who had been brought in as a neutral arbitrator. Someone in that room owed nothing to and who owed nothing to any of them. Luciano sat alone on the opposite side. Victor Sarno came in last, 54 years old. He had been an advisor to the organization since Luciano's father's time, and for the past 10 years he had been the man who carried paperwork into Luciano's office every afternoon. He brought no one with him, only a briefcase and a folder. He nodded to every man in the room, Luciano included, then sat down. He spoke slowly and quietly, with the voice of a man who was grieving rather than accusing. I've known him since he wasn't tall enough to reach my shoulder, Victor said. His father put him in my care. I have nothing to gain here. If I stand up from this table and no one believes me, I'm still just an old man with nothing. But if I keep sitting quietly, then I'm betraying a dead man. He opened the folder. I have 3 things. First, he said, for 7 years, he's been giving things up one by one. He cut one route. He shut down another connection. I'm not saying he was wrong. I'm only saying that when a man gives away one thing after another, eventually, when he needs something solid beneath his feet, he discovers there's nothing left to stand on. None of the 4 men seated in the row moved. Second, he turned a page. For the past 3 weeks, he's been seeing a woman no one knows anything about. He met her for the first time in a public dining room, in the middle of dinner, with men from our own house present. He put her in his car. He took her to his private office close to midnight. After that, he summoned the chief accountant and demanded 6 years of books. Victor raised his eyes. I don't care who he sleeps with. I care that from the day he met her, he started digging through his own family's records. Frank Mazzara still hadn't said a word. Third, Victor said. He removed 2 sets of papers and placed them on the table, pushing them toward the center. The first was a copy of a report file, with a faded heading at the top, its contents listing transportation routes and the names of the 4 men sitting in the room. In the lower right corner of the final page were 2 initials written in black ink. Everyone in this room recognizes whose initials those are, Victor said. I'm not saying I know where this report was going. I'm saying it exists. He pushed the second set forward. And these are transfers. 3 of them in 4 months. Money went out of an administrative account belonging to a federal task force. Money went into a company called Calvano Holdings. He didn't emphasize a single word. I checked that name myself 3 times because I didn't want to believe it. The men in the room began looking at one another. The man from Kansas City pulled the papers toward himself and read them. Luciano had remained silent from the beginning. He hadn't interrupted Victor once. When Victor finally closed the folder, Frank Mazzara turned toward him. Your turn. I didn't create any company by that name, Luciano said, and I've never seen that report before. Then what about those initials? They're mine, he said. The room went silent. He continued, his voice unchanged. I sign 4 sets of initials like that every day. Some days more. I put them on papers other people prepare and bring into my office. If those 2 letters alone are enough to prove something, then anyone who has handled my paperwork in the last 10 years could make a document like this. You're accusing me with the very habit you taught me to have. Victor didn't react. He only said, in the same sorrowful voice he had used from the beginning, that makes me even more worried, because if the signature of the man at the top is something even he himself can't guarantee, then what kind of condition are we in? The man from Kansas City set the papers down. He asked only one question. Who is the woman? Luciano looked directly at him. She has nothing to do with the family's business, he said. Then that makes it easier, the man replied. Give us her name. We ask her a few questions and leave her alone. No, Luciano said. It was the only word he spoke for the next 30 seconds. And it was the most expensive word he had spoken in 7 years. Frank Mazzara exhaled and placed both hands flat on the table. Then we have to start again from the beginning, he said. They broke for 2 hours and then went back in. Frank Mazzara read the preliminary decision in exactly 3 sentences, from a sheet of paper he had written by hand during the break, and he read it neither quickly nor slowly. Effective this afternoon, all decision-making authority held by Luciano Calvano is suspended until we meet again. No one is to take orders from him. No one is to give him paperwork. He set the paper down and added 1 sentence that wasn't written on it. No one has concluded anything yet. This is only so this table stays clean when we sit down again. No one objected. The man from Kansas City nodded. The 4 men seated in a row nodded as well, one after another, each looking at the next before doing it. Victor Sarno sat silently, both hands resting on his closed briefcase, and he didn't look at Luciano. Not once during the entire meeting did he look at him. Luciano stood. He buttoned his suit jacket, nodded toward Frank, and walked out. No one rose to see him off. At 4:11 that afternoon, he arrived at the club on 31st Street. It was the place his father had opened when Luciano was still a boy, and for the past 7 years it had been where he worked every day. There were 11 men in the front room. He knew the names and homes of all 11. When he walked in, the conversation already underway didn't stop all at once. It slowly grew quieter, and then disappeared completely, like someone turning down a radio. The man standing closest to the door was 50 years old, and had once carried Luciano on his shoulders at his own wedding. He turned and looked at the clock on the wall. The second man bent down to retie his shoelace. The third stood and went into the kitchen. No one said a word. No one cursed him. No one blocked his way. One by one, they simply found something else to look at. Luciano crossed the front room and went into his office. A stack of unprocessed papers sat on the desk. He didn't touch them. He opened a drawer, took out the ring of keys, removed 4 of them, and laid them in a straight line on the desk. Then he took the second phone from the drawer, the one paid for by the organization, removed the battery, and placed it beside the keys. He took nothing with him. At 4:17 that afternoon, he walked out the front door. It was still daylight outside. The sidewalk along 31st Street looked exactly as it always did. Pedestrians passing, a delivery truck backing up, a horn sounding at the distant intersection. Nothing had changed at all. 3 cars were parked along the curb in front of the club. 2 started their engines and drove away. The third remained. Ray Kowalski stepped out, walked around the front of the car, and opened the rear door. He said nothing. He didn't ask how the meeting had gone. He didn't say he believed him. He simply stood there with one hand holding the door, his eyes on the street, and waited. Luciano stopped on the sidewalk for a moment. "You know you don't have to do this." "I know," Ray said. He kept holding the door. At that exact moment, the phone in Luciano's pocket vibrated. He took it out. A message from a number he didn't have saved, containing nothing but a link. He opened it. It led to a local news site, the City Affairs section, an article posted at 4:13 that afternoon. The headline said that a construction businessman on Chicago's South Side had become a person of interest in a review involving municipal infrastructure contracts. The article was 3 paragraphs long. It didn't name him. It named the company. It named the figure $74 million. And in the final paragraph, there was a sentence saying that, according to a source familiar with internal matters, the man had recently had his role restricted by his own associates. Luciano looked at the publication time, 4:13. Then he looked at the time on his phone, 4:18. Frank Mazzara had read the decision a little before 4. Luciano had left the warehouse at 4:02. He had stepped onto this sidewalk at 4:17. No one could write 3 paragraphs, contact a source, and get the story posted on a news site in 11 minutes. The article had already been written. It had been sitting there, waiting for someone to press a button. Maybe it had been ready since yesterday. Maybe since the week before. He locked the screen and slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Do you read the news online, Ray?" he asked. "I don't," Ray said. "My wife does." "Then tonight, don't let her read it." Ray nodded. Then he said the only thing he would say for the rest of that afternoon. "Where to?" Luciano looked back at the club door closing behind him, the door that in 7 years he had never once needed to open for himself, and said, "Bridgeport. Just take me there. Then go home to your wife. Don't come back for me tomorrow morning." Ray didn't answer. He simply waited until Luciano was seated before closing the door, and he drove away more slowly than usual, as though the car were carrying something fragile that no one wanted to name. On Wednesday afternoon, Grace finished her shift at 4 o'clock. She had just stepped out the back door of the diner on Halsted Street when she saw a black car parked there, with an older man standing beside the rear door, his hands clasped in front of him. "Miss Bennett, I'm Victor Sarno. I only need 15 minutes. I won't keep you long." He didn't block her path. He stepped back half a pace, so she could clearly see that she was free to walk away. She stood still. He pointed toward the coffee shop diagonally across the street. "We can sit in there," he said. "It's public." They took a table beside the window. He ordered coffee for both of them, then pushed one cup toward her without asking whether she wanted it. "I knew your father," he said. "Tommy Bennett. He worked with our family for 19 years. He was a decent man, and what happened to him was something that shouldn't have happened." Grace didn't answer. Victor opened his briefcase, took out a thin folder, and placed it on the table without opening it. "I'm here because I want to give you a way out," he said. "Hear me through before you answer." He began counting on his fingertips, slowly, like a man reading instructions from a prescription. First, $2 million, cash, divided into 3 payments over 3 months, without passing through any bank account in your name. Second, the house on Throop Street. Clean title, no mortgage, no conditions, transferred within 2 weeks. I cover the fees. Third, the debt, erased completely, in writing, notarized. Fourth, a ticket. You go wherever you want. Someone will arrange a place for you to live for the first 3 months. He stopped and took a sip of coffee. "What do I give you in return?" Grace asked. "A statement," he said, "notarized. In it, you say 2 things. First, that on the night at the restaurant, you were forced to leave the table against your will. The man who forced you was Luciano Calvano. You didn't know him. You didn't invite him to sit down. He took your papers and put you in his car." He turned a page inside the folder. "Second, you state what you yourself learned last week, that the man who signed the order sending 3 men to your father's diner that October night 5 years ago was Luciano Calvano." He pushed the folder toward her. Inside was a copy of the 9-line sheet, and in the lower right corner were 2 initials written in black ink. "You've already seen this, haven't you?" Victor said. Grace didn't touch it. "I'm not asking you to lie," he said. "That's the beauty of it. I'm asking you to write down exactly what you saw with your own eyes. You get to keep your truth." She sat in silence. He continued, his voice still gentle. "You're 27 years old. You work 2 shifts a day. I know you paid $600 a week for 4 years. I know that number because I'm the man who approved that collection route. You've already paid us enough to buy an apartment. Now I'm giving you back many times more than that." He tapped the tabletop twice with 1 finger. "You take $2 million, or you go back to waiting tables. People like you don't get many chances to choose in this life, Miss Bennett." Grace looked down at the coffee. Outside the window, a bus stopped and then pulled away. "How long do I have?" she asked. "Until Friday morning," he said. He wrote a phone number on the back of a business card, placed it on the table, stood, and thanked her for her time. Then he walked out. Grace remained in the coffee shop for another 20 minutes. Then she walked 3 blocks to the stop, boarded the Route 8 bus, and sat near the back. From her cloth bag, she took out the file Luciano had given her that night, the 34 pages with the 9-line sheet resting on top. She read the 9 lines from beginning to end. Then she read them again. The name of the diner, the address, $40,000. Contacted 3 times, no response. Recommendation to proceed in the usual manner. And the 2 initials in the corner. She had sat in that office and heard Luciano say it with his own mouth. No one had forced him to say it. There had been no one else in the room but the 2 of them. But now, sitting on this bus, she tried to think about it another way. If a man knew for certain that those papers would eventually come to light, what would be the smartest thing for him to do? Say it first. Sit down in front of the dead man's daughter, place the file on the table, and admit what he had done in a voice so calm that no one could doubt him afterward. She looked out the window. $2 million. She did the calculation in her head even though she didn't want to. 600 a week was a number she had lived with for 4 years. 2 million divided by 600 was 3,333 weeks. 64 years. Longer than the life she had already lived. Longer than the life her father had lived. She thought about the house. She thought about never having to look at the clock on Tuesday morning again. She sat that way through 4 stops. At the 5th, she stood, and as she held the rail and moved toward the door, she slipped one hand into the pocket of the apron she still hadn't taken off and touched the phone inside. The screen was still lit. The recording app was still running. 27 minutes. When Grace got home, she didn't turn on the living room light. She went into the kitchen, switched on the ceiling light, pushed the dining table against the wall, and spread everything she had across the floor. 34 pages from her father's file, the 9-line sheet, the copies of the notebook containing 260 entries, the 4 company registration forms, and the power of attorney that Luciano had taken at the restaurant and later returned to her, and finally, the printed copy of the article from the local news site, which she had gone to an internet cafe to print twice. She sat down on the kitchen floor and began with page 1. Her father had taught her to do it this way when she was 16, sitting at the counter in the diner every Saturday night after closing. Don't read to understand. Read to compare. Take a number from one page, find that exact number on another, and see whether the two match. He used to say that most fraud wasn't uncovered because people were clever, but because no one was willing to sit down and finish the boring work all the way through. 40 minutes passed. She found nothing. The article said, 74 million. The power of attorney had a seal and a signature. The 4 registration forms listed 4 company names she had never heard before. Everything matched exactly the way it was supposed to match, and that was precisely what made her stay on the floor and keep looking. At the 41st minute, she picked up the 4th registration form for the 3rd time. On the line beneath the company name was a 9-digit number, the Federal Tax Identification Number, Calvano Holdings. She read the number, set the page down, and reached for her father's file. Inside it, on page 17, was a copy of an old invoice that the Calvano family's construction company had issued 16 years earlier, and at the top of that invoice, printed in small type, was another 9-digit number. She placed the 2 pages beside each other on the kitchen floor and read the digits one by one with the tip of her finger, twice. The first 7 digits were identical. The 8th was different. The 9th was different. And in the middle, the 6th digit had been switched with the 7th. 3 digits. On a computer screen, inside a 3-paragraph article, no one ever reads all 9 digits. People read the name. She turned the registration form over. In the lower corner was the filing date for the company's formation. 4 months earlier. The company had only existed for 4 months, carrying a name that looked almost identical to the name of a company that had existed for 30 years, with a number that differed by only 3 digits. Grace sat motionless on the kitchen floor for a long time. Then she stood, went into the hallway, pulled down the folding ladder, and climbed into the attic. She had been up there exactly twice in 5 years, both times to look for paperwork connected to the house. Inside were several boxes of old clothes, a broken sewing machine, and in the farthest corner beneath a tarp were 3 cardboard boxes sealed with tape that had yellowed with age, boxes she had always assumed contained things from the diner. She dragged the first one out and tore through the tape. Inside were ledgers, not printed ledgers, grid-lined notebooks with hard covers, handwritten from beginning to end, numbered along the spines from 1 through 22. She took out volume 1 and opened it. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Small, even, slightly slanted. The same handwriting that had ruled 4 columns with a straight edge in the blue notebook she had carried in her cloth bag for 4 years. Because she had learned to write from the man who wrote these pages. She carried all 3 boxes down to the kitchen and sat beneath the ceiling light reading. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. Inside those notebooks was a handwritten list of subcontractors, and beside some of the names her father had placed question marks in pencil, then written in the margins that no workers had appeared at the job sites. She followed the question marks, and near the end of volume 19, she found a line where he had copied the name and address of the registered agent office that had formed those companies. She opened one of her own company registration forms, the one they had tried to force her to sign 3 weeks earlier, and compared the 2 names. The same office, the same address in the northern suburbs. The notebook in her hands had been written 20 years ago. Luciano Calvano hadn't taken his father's place until 7 years ago. Grace stared at the date written at the top of the notebook for a long time. Then she stood, put 2 of the notebooks into her cloth bag, pulled on her coat, and left the house a little before 11 o'clock at night. She took 2 bus routes to Bridgeport. The light in the office was still on. She knocked. No one answered. She knocked again, then called his name. Still no answer. She stepped back, sat down on the concrete steps outside the door, placed the cloth bag on her lap, and waited. 40 minutes later, the door opened, but not because he had decided to open it for her. He stood in the doorway with a phone still pressed to his ear, speaking to someone. "Say that again, Mr. Shaw." On the other end of the line, Emmett Shaw said that 2 men had come to the restaurant that afternoon, presented a document bearing the name of a law firm, and ordered him to delete all surveillance footage from that Thursday night. "I deleted it, sir," he said. "Everything from the system. I deleted it right in front of them. They stood there and watched me do it." Then he paused. "But the morning after that night, I copied it onto an external drive before I went to sleep. It isn't at the restaurant, Mr. Calvano, and it isn't at my house either." Luciano lowered the phone and looked at the woman sitting on the steps. She stood and lifted the cloth bag. The 7th person arrived at noon the following day, and he was the only one in the group who was being paid. Warren Fisk was 66 years old, had spent 31 years as a forensic document examiner for the Illinois State Police Crime Laboratory, and had been retired for 4 years, taking work only from law offices since then. He arrived carrying 2 aluminum cases, set up a desk lamp in the corner of the room, spread the papers out, and for 2 straight nights barely spoke to anyone. He asked exactly 3 questions every time someone handed him a new document. Who gave this to you? Where was it before that? Did anyone handle it between those 2 points in time? Then he wrote the answers in a notebook of his own, before he touched the paper. During those 2 nights, there were always 6 people inside the 2-room Bridgeport office. Grace sat at one corner of the long table, comparing her father's 22 handwritten ledgers against the subcontractor lists, and she worked faster than everyone else, because she was the only person who could read that handwriting without having to guess. Adele Marchetti sat beside her with the black ledger she had kept for 30 years, checking one date at a time, and every time she found a matching point, she marked it with a small yellow slip of paper. Emmett Shaw brought the hard drive on the first night, plugged it into the computer, opened the exact footage they needed, then sat quietly in a chair beside the door for the rest of the night without anyone telling him to stay. Ray Kowalski remained outside, walking back and forth, buying coffee, and every 2 hours making a circuit around the block. Gia came on the second night without asking why, carrying a bag of food and a printer borrowed from the center, and when she saw Grace sitting at the corner of the table, she simply nodded to her in greeting and sat down to organize papers. Not one of those 6 people had power. None of them had anyone beneath them, a gun, or a name that made other people lower their voices. On the second night, close to 4 o'clock in the morning, Warren Fisk called Luciano over to the lamp table and handed him a 2-page report. Luciano read it twice, set it down, and remained silent for a long while. Then he turned and looked at everyone in the room. "Tomorrow they meet again," he said. "There'll be 4 branches there, 2 outsiders, and someone keeping a record. Victor is the one who asked for that meeting. He chose the room, he chose who would be there, and he even chose how everything would be presented." Luciano tapped one fingertip against the stack of papers, and that's where he made his mistake. If he'd called me into a coffee shop and spoken to me alone, all he would have needed was for me to stay quiet. But he invited the whole family to sit there and watch. In front of that many people, no one gets to reach a conclusion based on a feeling anymore. They have to ask where the papers are. His eyes moved from one person to the next. "Tomorrow we don't win by speaking louder than he does. We win by being more accurate than he is, 1 page at a time. If you're not certain about what you're holding in your hands, don't bring it into that room." At 9 o'clock the next morning, the meeting resumed at the warehouse on Ashland Street. The heads of the 4 branches sat in the same straight row as before. Frank Mazzara was at the head of the table. Beside him sat the man from Kansas City, and this time a second man had been invited from Milwaukee, another outsider who owed nothing to anyone in the room. In the corner sat a man with a thick notebook in front of him, and he began writing from the very first sentence. Frank kept it brief. "Whatever anyone says today gets written down. Anyone who presents documents leaves a copy. When this is over, that notebook gets sealed." Victor Sarno spoke for 40 minutes, and he did it very well. He began with the flow of money. He didn't start by saying $74 million. He started with a single municipal drainage contract, showing the entire room how much money came in, how much went out, and how the difference flowed into a name no one in the room recognized. Then he did the same thing with a second contract, then a third. By the 4th, the 4 men sitting in the row had already begun nodding to themselves before Victor finished his sentence. After that, he produced the report file with 2 initials in the corner, and he made no further comment about it. He simply left it lying on the table. Then he produced the 3 transfer orders, showing money going into Calvano Holdings. He read the company name aloud exactly once, slowly, and stopped there. He didn't read the number beneath it. Finally, he took a large printed photograph from his briefcase and placed it on the table, turning it toward the 4 men seated in the row. It had been taken from across the street in daylight and was slightly blurred. In the photograph, a woman in a waitress uniform was walking out the back door of a diner on Halstead Street. "Here," Victor said. He didn't emphasize the word. "This is the woman who, from the day he met her, caused the head of our family to start reopening his own books, summoning the chief accountant for questioning, and refusing to give her name to this table." He sat down. "A waitress," he said. "I have nothing against her. She's only a waitress. But I'm asking all of you, if the man at the top can be turned around by someone like her, how much longer can this family stand?" The room fell silent. Then all 7 men at the head of the table turned toward Luciano. Luciano stood and carried 4 folders with him. He placed them in a straight row on the table and didn't open any of them immediately. "I'm going to present 4 things," he said. "For each one, I'll tell you what it proves and what it doesn't prove. If anyone thinks I'm going too far, interrupt me right then." He opened the first folder and set a computer on the table. Surveillance footage from the dining room at the Ambrose, Thursday night more than 3 weeks ago. Mr. Shaw copied it the following morning and kept it outside the restaurant system. The afternoon before yesterday, someone came and ordered him to delete the copy on the system, and he deleted it in front of them. The footage ran for 6 minutes. It clearly showed a man taking a phone from the woman sitting with him and putting it into his breast pocket. It clearly showed a third man at the next table who had ordered no food, opening a briefcase with a notary seal inside. It clearly showed a wristwatch being removed and placed face up with the dial turned toward the woman. This proves that her documents were being held and that she was being put under a deadline, Luciano said. It doesn't prove who gave the order. He opened the second folder and played a 27-minute recording. The entire room listened to all of it. No one interrupted. When it reached the final sentence, the one about $2 million and about how someone like her didn't get many chances to choose in life, the man keeping the record in the corner stopped writing for 1 beat, then continued. Luciano switched off the recording. "This proves that someone offered money to buy a statement," he said. "It doesn't yet prove the money trail." He opened the third folder, took out 2 sheets of paper, and placed them side by side. On this table are 3 transfer orders, sending money into a company called Calvano Holdings. And this is the federal tax identification number of my family's construction company, printed on an invoice from 16 years ago. He pushed the 2 pages toward the middle. "Read the 9 digits. Don't read the name. Read the 9 digits." The man from Milwaukee pulled the pages toward himself and read them aloud. When he reached the 6th digit, he stopped and started again from the beginning. "3 digits are different," Luciano said, "and the company receiving the money was formed 4 months ago." Then he nodded toward the far end of the table. Adele Marchetti stood, placed her black ledger on the table, and opened it to the place marked with a yellow slip. "Last week, someone brought 11 documents to my house bearing my seal," she said. "I had never seen a single one of them before. I've kept a ledger for 30 years, 1 entry every time I notarize something, and not 1 entry matches those 11 documents." She turned another page. 4 of them are dated during a period when I was in Italy. My sister died, and I was gone 11 days. She placed her passport on the table, already open to the page with the entry stamp, and beside it she laid 2 airline ticket stubs. No one said anything. Then Warren Fisk was invited forward. He didn't sit. He placed 3 sheets of paper on the table, each one inside a clear plastic sleeve. "These 3 authorization documents are originals," he said. "All 7 companies discussed this morning were created based on these 3 documents. Without these 3, none of it exists." He pointed to the signature at the bottom of each page. "The signature here belongs to Mr. Salvatore Calvano. The date on the documents is 14 months after his death." A chair scraped somewhere in the room. "I found 3 things," Fisk said. "First, the ink. This ink contains an optical brightening agent that no manufacturer put on the market until 2 years after the date printed on these documents. Second, the paper. The batch code in the watermark belongs to a production run that didn't begin until 18 months after the funeral. Third, the handwriting." He placed 2 enlarged photographs on the table. "A genuine signature has darker and lighter areas because a person changes speed and pressure while writing. These 3 signatures are uniformly thick from beginning to end. The pen followed an existing path instead of creating a new one." He gathered his materials and stepped back. Everyone in the room turned toward Victor Sarno. He sat still for 3 seconds. Then he spoke, his voice still as quiet as it had been that morning. "Those 3 documents never passed through my hands. The man who has prepared and maintained the records in this house for the past 10 years is Lou Petrosino. If signatures were fabricated, that's who you need to ask." Lou Petrosino was sitting in the row of chairs against the wall. He stood before anyone could call his name. He walked forward, placed his phone on the table, and read aloud 6 access codes for the record keeper to write down. Then he said, "The $74 million isn't gone. Not $1 is missing. It's sitting in 6 accounts. I opened those 6 accounts, but the only person authorized to sign withdrawals is Mr. Sarno. Check them yourselves." He sat down in the nearest chair and didn't get up again. Frank Mazzara placed both hands on the table. "Does anyone else have something to say?" At the back of the room, Brett Corrigan stood. No one called him. He walked to the middle of the room with both arms hanging at his sides. And when he spoke, he looked down at the tabletop instead of at anyone's face. "That October night 5 years ago, Mr. Sarno was the one who sent me to the diner on Throop Street," he said. "He gave me the 9-line sheet and told me to collect $40,000. He also gave me one extra instruction that I didn't understand at the time. Once I got inside, I was supposed to look for some handwritten ledgers. For the next 4 years, I kept going to that house once every week to collect, and every single time he asked whether I'd seen the ledgers. He stopped. I never asked him why. Not once. Frank Mazzara asked. Why didn't you ask? Brett raised his head. Because when he sent me somewhere, I didn't ask questions, he said. I'm his son. Frank Mazzara looked around the room, and then stopped at the row of chairs against the wall. Miss Bennett, he said, you're the only person here who doesn't belong to this world. Is there anything you'd like to say? Grace stood. She walked to the middle of the room, placed her cloth bag on the table, and took out 2 things. The first was the blue notebook with the broken spine repaired with clear tape. The second was a yellowed, hard-covered grid notebook, with the number 19 written on its spine. She placed them side by side. This one is mine, she said. 260 entries. Every entry is 1 week when I paid $600 to your people. The other one belonged to my father. He copied things by hand through all 19 years he worked for this family, and he finished writing it 20 years ago. She opened her father's notebook to a page marked with a pencil question mark, and turned it toward the 4 men sitting in the row. In here is the name of the office that formed the companies you've been hearing about this morning. My father wrote that name down 20 years ago, which means this existed before Mr. Calvano took that chair 7 years ago. Then she said the final words without raising her voice and without trembling. My father wrote everything down because he knew no one would believe a man like him. I wrote things down too, because I knew no one would believe a waitress. You don't have to believe either of us, but you will have to answer for these numbers. She picked up her bag and returned to her seat. No one spoke for a long time. Then Frank Mazzara closed the record book. The decision that followed wasn't long. Victor Sarno was stripped of everything. No position, no share, no one taking orders from him, and no one under any obligation to protect him anymore. He stood, fastened his jacket button, nodded toward Frank the way he had done for 30 years, then walked to the door, alone. No one followed him. No one stopped him. The warehouse door closed behind him, and it was the last time anyone in that room ever saw him. 3 weeks later, a financial file concerning the city's infrastructure contracts was forwarded by a law office to the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois. The matter was assigned to Assistant United States Attorney Diane Prescott. 4 months later, Victor Sarno was indicted on wire fraud charges. The underworld didn't punish him. The law called him by name, brought him into an open courtroom, and made him sit there while people read aloud, one number at a time, what an accountant had written by hand 20 years earlier. Luciano didn't keep the throne. He didn't wait for anyone to vote his authority back to him. He dismantled every part of the organization that wasn't clean, handed the legitimate operations to people he trusted, and did something no one in that world had ever done before. The $74 million was taken from those 6 accounts, and he returned it to the 340 small businesses in the neighborhood, calculated according to the exact number of weeks each one had paid. He went himself. He sent no one in his place. Some people opened the door, invited him inside, and made him a cup of coffee. Some took the check and slammed the door in his face. One elderly woman at a shoe repair shop took the check, tore it in half in front of him, and told him exactly what she thought of him. Luciano stood there and listened from beginning to end, without arguing a single word, then bowed his head to her and walked to the next door. He kept exactly 2 things, the construction company and Rosalie House. One June afternoon, he went to Throop Street. He gave Grace the documents showing the house had been transferred into her name, with clean title, no mortgage, and no conditions. Along with them was a cardboard box. Inside were all 34 pages of her father's file, the 9-line sheet carrying Luciano's initials, and the originals of everything connected to that October night 5 years earlier. Give them to whoever you want, he said. Give them to the press. Give them to a lawyer. Give them to a prosecutor. I won't stop you, and I won't say one word in my own defense. Grace accepted the box. She didn't give it to anyone, not because she had forgiven him. She told him once, and never repeated it, that her father had kept records his entire life, so that one day someone might finally sit down and read them, and someone already had. 10 months later, Bennett's reopened on Throop Street. It still had 14 seats, still had one long counter, and the neon sign had been remade to look exactly like the old one. Grace stood behind the counter wearing an apron, and this time, it was an apron she had chosen for herself. On opening morning, Adele Marchetti came and sat at the table farthest inside. Emmett Shaw brought a potted plant. Ray Kowalski stood outside the door smoking and refused to come in. Gia arrived half an hour late and stayed to wash dishes until noon. Luciano sat 2 tables away from the counter. He didn't sit at the corner table. Near noon, Grace walked past him, carrying the coffee pot. She stopped. She set the pot down. Then she raised one hand, palm facing outward, folded her thumb inward, and closed her 4 fingers over it. Luciano shot to his feet before he had time to think. Grace opened her hand again. "This time it doesn't mean save me," she said. "This time it means stay." He sat down. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat with him. And beyond the window, the neighborhood moved through another ordinary noon, no one knowing what had just happened at that table. This story leaves us with a few things worth thinking about. Power is at its most dangerous, not when it is cruel, but when it makes the person holding it lazy, signing things they have never read, and trusting someone else's summary, instead of turning to the second page themselves. One careless signature written in 4 minutes took the life of a decent man and stole 5 years from his daughter. The second lesson is that no one is so small that their words don't deserve to be checked. An entire system collapsed not because of power or money, but because of a waitress's notebook and a 71-year-old woman's ledger, 2 people whom no one had ever bothered to listen to. And finally, asking for help has never been weakness. It is one of the clearest and most conscious acts a person trapped against a wall can make. The hand signal in this story is a real signal used in many places around the world. Palm facing outward, thumb folded inward, then the 4 fingers closing over it. Please remember it, because one day you may be the only person looking in the right direction. If this story touched you, please press the like button, share it with your loved ones, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue listening together to compelling stories every day. How did this story make you feel? And in the life around you, have you ever encountered someone quietly asking for help while no one else noticed? Please leave a comment below. We truly hope to hear the thoughts and feelings that come from deep within your heart. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you again in the next video.